freight is a leading indicator and one of the best indicators of actual economic movement. So whether it's raw materials that are heading to factories or finished goods that's going to distribution centers or retail shelves, when freight moves, the economy is in motion.
Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the #1 voice of supply chain. Join us as we share critical news, key insights, and real supply chain leadership from across the globe, one conversation at a time.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton and Karin Bursa here with you on Supply Chain Now. Karin, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Oh, I am too. This is one of our favorites, folks. Today we continue a long-running quarterly series, a popular, informative series that we get a lot of feedback around. We're going to be sharing key insights from the latest quarterly edition of one of the leading transportation industry resources. Of course, you know that's the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index for Q2 2025. Now, Karin, this is one of my favorite ongoing shows because it is just really informative and it provides really an in-the-know market analysis that you just can't find a lot of places, right? Not only will we dive into what the data is telling us, but we'll marry that with boots on the ground, in-market practitioner perspective. We're going to get a good sense of what transpired in the second quarter 2025. We're going to be sharing a few nuggets that will help prep you for where we are now and where we're heading. So a great show coming up. Karin, it's going to give us an opportunity to really lean into that facts, not feelings mantra, huh?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know that I'm a big believer in kind of draining that emotion and really digging into the facts and the trends. So absolutely, facts, not feelings, not headlines, which we're getting a lot of these days.
That's right. They're coming at us left and right. Karin, you know I'm a big fan of context. Before we bring on our guests, I want to share this. So folks, if you don't know, the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index, which is released every quarter, again, it's all about data-driven and market-driven insights, but there's one really important element to all the research. And Karin, you know we love our data. All those treasure troves of data that's processed through U.S. Bank. In fact, did you know this? Here's a little factoid. U.S. Bank processed $43 billion worth of transactions in 2024 alone. So all of those data-driven insights and the exceptional commentary, well, that's one of the biggest reasons why U.S. Bank is such a great resource for this information that business leaders leverage out in the market. So, Karin, with no further ado, are you ready for me to introduce our esteemed panel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's jump right on in. Folks, I want to welcome in our featured guest here today. Backed by popular demand is Bobby Holland, Director of Freight Business Analytics with U.S. Bank. And, man, big guest alert, Bob Costello, Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of International Trade and Security Policy for the American Trucking Associations. Hey, Bobby, great to have you back. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. And it's always a big show when Bobby Holland joins, but it's even bigger today, Karin, because Bobby's bringing a titan of industry. Bob, welcome. We've enjoyed your thought leadership and industry analysis for years. Great to have you here today.
Well, you're being very kind, but it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about this.
Awesome. Well, great to have you. We enjoyed the pre-show conversations Karin and I have. And folks, now's a great time to download this free report and you can follow along as we dive in. You can spill coffee on it, dog ear it, mark it up, you name it. So Bob, we like to start with a fun warm-up question here before we dive into all sorts of supply chain data insights and all about freight. We hear you're a big-time tennis player. I'm kind of a fan of the game. I am not a tennis player, not an athlete really, but I want to ask you one of your favorite all-time tennis players, my friend.
Oh man, I've been playing tennis my whole life. I love it. My 16-year-old daughter is into it. She trains. She's in training all this week, 6-7 hours a day. We all love it in my family. You know, I gotta go with Roger Federer. I just think he's a great dude. He was so good. I mean, the big three were amazing. Now we got the big two, but I'm going to go with Roger Federer as my all-time favorite.
I love that. He's one of the best of all time. You could probably make an arguable case. He might be the best of all time. I don't know. I'll leave that to the tennis experts. Bobby Holland. Now, you've got a little bit of a rebel in your blood, I think. Who'd you kind of grow up watching?
I grew up watching. I admired Andre Agassi. I thought he was, one of the first tennis players to show a bit of style. Wasn't, the traditional style, and plus he was a good player. I mean, he could back up his devil may care with some action. So that was what I admired when I was younger.
Completely agree. And I'm not sure after he shaved those long locks, I think he just got better, kind of the opposite of some of the biblical stories out there. Yes, Bobby C, you should say.
I like it when he is.
And of course, the Rebel camera commercials were stuck to my ears from back in the day. Karin, same question. Big tennis fan. What's your favorite player?
Well, from the pros, Serena Williams. But my current favorite is my niece, who is a young, up-and-coming high school player.
Okay.
That really one to watch for the future.
Outstanding, Karin. I love how you kind of brought it home there. We're gonna have to have her on a future show. I would just add to, as Karin said, Serena Williams. Oh my gosh, I've never watched more tennis than that legendary one of her final runs in New York at the U.S. Open back, I think, in 2022. And then when I was younger, Pete Sampras. Just quiet, go about the business, just keep winning. As Al Davis said, just win, baby, right? Time to get to work. And Bobby, what we want to start with before we get into the truckload upon truckload of insights and takeaways, if you had to put today's conversation into a one-sentence theme, what would that be, Bobby?
Well, I would say that nationally, we're seeing signs of a rebound in both shipments and spend. The question is, will it last?
Ooh, that is a billion-dollar question. Will it last indeed? So a little more context. I think it's really important for folks to kind of view a lot of the insights and expertise that you're going to hear here through the proper lens. And Bob, tell us a little more about yourself. As I would like to say, you said we're being generous, but I think it's very genuine. Your thought leadership and industry voice has been around, has informed a lot of business leaders. But for the three people that hadn't heard of that, tell us about yourself and ATA.
Yeah, so I've been working at the American Trucking Associations here in Washington, D.C. For over 28 years. I can't believe it. I would have never guessed it, but I love this industry. It's so amazing. And ATA, as we call it, is the largest trade association representing motor carriers, but also manufacturers in the industry. And I also do international trade policy, which is important right now, as everybody knows, as well as security policy. We won't talk about today, but cargo theft is on the rise and is a problem. So those are some issues I deal with.
Oh, Bob, we could spend 5 hours talking about just the topics you mentioned in your response, but great to have you here and your expertise along with Bobby and Karin. And Karin, that brings me around to you. How do you see business leaders such as yourself, industry leaders, using great resources like the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index?
Yeah, well, I think the analysis is really important. Freight is a leading indicator and one of the best indicators of actual economic movement. So whether it's raw materials that are heading to factories or finished goods that's going to distribution centers or retail shelves, when freight moves, the economy is in motion.
Oh, Karin, you just spiked the football, that Auburn Tigers football, on a really important point, because as we track and unpack what's going on in the freight market, domestic or international, man, it can really help us read the tea leaves. Excellent comment there, Karin. Okay, so Bobby, I want to do this next. I know you answer this question every quarter for us, going on probably 5 years now, but this is really important because for our new viewers or listeners, they may be new to the Freight Payment Index. So if you would, Bobby, tell us how it all works.
Well, our Freight Payment Index, it's U.S. Bank's view of the freight market, informed by our $43 billion currently in payment transaction data. It's a chain-based index. We designed it to measure the delta and velocity of changes in the freight market. Again, it's a chain-based index quarter over quarter. We do year-over-year comparisons as well. It's another set of data points we provide to the marketplace for good decision-making.
Outstanding. I love the region by region breakdowns. It's one of my favorite parts. And in a new addition, I think within the last year or so, we're adding freight rate information from our friends at DAT. So y'all jammed up even more value in this quarterly free resource. So folks, you can check out the link to download your copy or go to freight.usbank.com. So let's do this. We're about to dive into the 8 key takeaways from the Q2 2025 Freight Payment Index. And we're going to start at the national level, Bobby. We got 3 key takeaways from just the overall national aspect of this report. Tell us more.
Well, number one, for the first time since the second quarter of 2022, the Freight Payment Index Shipment and spend indexes revealed quarterly shipment and spend volume increases. Secondly, from a year-over-year perspective, the U.S. bank freight payment national shipment and spend indexes were down overall. However, the declines were the smallest since Q1 2023. And then finally, despite plenty of regional positivity, because we saw all 5 regions with quarter-over-quarter shipment increases for the first time in 4 years, again, it may be too soon to say, have we turned that corner? Again, it looks like we're seeing signs, but as we said, will it last?
Will it last? That's going to be the big theme here today.
Last. I know.
So, Bob, at that national level, your thoughts, what would you add to what Bobby has shared?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was encouraging. I think what people have to remember is, and Karin, you kind of brought this up earlier, this is a great reflection that the transportation industry is a great reflection of the goods economy, right? So I tell people all the time, look at GDP numbers, but not the overall number. You got to really focus in because we're not putting services in trailers, we're putting goods in trailers. So what happened in the second quarter that helped? One was manufacturing activity. After a couple of years of down manufacturing activity, we actually saw some nice increases in output from the previous quarter as well as year over year. So that definitely helped freight volumes. And more specifically in that, durable goods. So these are products with a usable life of at least 3 years. That was also very helpful. I think sometimes we forget in the US, we are the second largest manufacturing in the economy in the world by far. Now we're by far behind China, but we are a huge player in manufacturing globally, and therefore that's so important to trucking, right? So that's very important. The other thing we saw is for the first time in a long time, we actually saw households start to spend more on goods in the second quarter than they were on experiences. So we've seen this incredible increase in experiences after the first couple of years of the pandemic. You remember all this stuff about revenge travel and all that sort of stuff? Well, then they started to move over to goods again, and that has definitely been helpful. Housing, not so much, but those two, I think, really helped during the second quarter.
Bob, what outstanding commentary. And we're an example of that. We went out and got a new TV for the first time in 27 years. So we'll see. Karin, what would you add at a national level?
Well, I think the point that Bobby made just very quickly is super important, and that is that the national shipment and spend index were both in positive territory or both moving in a favorable direction. So that means that some of the downward pricing pressure may be getting a little relief, but that we are seeing both, the actual economic impact as well as the volume of goods. So 2 good trends to continue watching.
Great call out there, Karin. Bob, I want to get you to comment on this just really quick before we go region by region. I was talking earlier, that's one of my favorite parts because it allows us to speak at the high level, and then we drill in deeper to some of the different dynamics. I think the region by region is one of your favorite components of this report as well. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Bobby, tell us, give us your key takeaway from the West region.
Well, despite fluctuations in the port activity, the West region posted modest increases in quarterly and yearly shipments for the second consecutive quarter. In particular, it was up 1.3% in shipments, and it was down only 0.7% quarterly, but it was up 2.3% year over year in the West.
Okay.
So again, just some good signs. By comparison, nationally, we were up 2.4% for the quarter and 1.2% in spend for the quarter. So kind of gives you an idea of how the West relates to the national.
I love starting out West. We all know the tidal waves of products that come through that really important gateway into really all points North America. Bob, your comments on what we're seeing out West.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind here, right? One is, I think, if you look at underlying data, in the first quarter, we saw this tidal wave of imports coming in to the West. And I think, we couldn't use all those because they were trying to beat the tariffs, right? So a lot of that was put into storage that I think during the second quarter got distributed. So even though we saw these ups and downs in import volumes on the West Coast. It was a lot of that from the first quarter was distributed in the second quarter. So I think, that's very helpful. And the other thing to remember is, on these imports, we all think finished goods, it's things that we buy at home, but almost half of all imports into the U.S. are inputs to the U.S. manufacturing process.
Yep.
So that is very important on the West. So that, I think, is something that maybe some people would have missed and would have been a little surprised on the strength that we saw on the West Coast.
Yep. Love that, Bob. And man, don't sleep on all those inputs. All right, Karin Bursa, out West, your comments.
Yeah, I think Bob made a really good point, and that is, as all of the news about tariffs and pending tariffs hit the marketplace, many companies did what we would refer to in consumer goods as forward buying, right? They brought that inventory in ahead of those potential price increases. And so the fact that we have then taken a couple of quarters to burn through that inventory means now maybe we'll see a more normalized pattern going forward.
Oh, isn't the word normal just music to your ears? And Karin, we talk a lot about...
It's never normal.
Yeah, that's right. You beat me to it. All right. I want to add on to a quick nugget on what we saw out West that really our whole panel spoke to. Port activity. So as reported here by Transport Talks, the tariff whipsaw effect. How about that for a phrase? Had West Coast port activity really all over the board, as Bob spoke to, including the Port of LA, which experienced its busiest June on record. However, overall cargo volumes for the months of May and June 2025 at this critical U.S. seaport were about the same as 2024. And that comes from Gene Soroka, Executive Director of the Port of LA. So we'll see what all of that might mean in third quarter and beyond. And Bob, really quick, so the report published about, y'all concluded about a month or so ago. Any additional comments on what you've seen since the report published?
Yeah, we saw a couple things. Well, first of all, on the imports, don't forget too, there's a lot of trucking activity down in Southern California coming in from Mexico, right? And so that is also important part on the trade. One of the things that was also sort of hurting volumes a little bit on the West was we saw housing starts out there.
Yep.
We can talk about housing starts generally later in different regions, but housing starts in the West wasn't very good. And in fact, they were down from the previous quarter as well as a year earlier. There's a lot of pent-up demand all over the place for housing, but it's, again, interest rates aren't falling. And of course, we know that's causing a lot of people talking about that and the chairman of the Fed. So a lot of things going on in that area as well.
That's right. And of course, I got a sneaking suspicion we'll talk more about housing starts and housing market in just a second, because it's a big player in what drives freight activity. Good stuff there. All right, so let's move from the West to the Southwest, folks, the Southwest region, as we're walking through 5 regions that all make up the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index. Bobby, what's your key takeaway from the Southwest region?
Okay, so for the Southwest, with cross-border trade being down, it was decent manufacturing that helped the Southwest rebound from a poor first quarter, with the largest quarterly gain in shipments of 6.7% amongst the 5 regions.
Okay, so it's leading the pack of sorts. In some ways, that's a good place to be most of the time. Bob, your thoughts on what we saw out in the Southwest?
Yeah, so one of the things when I think about the Southwest, my mind immediately first goes to the Port of Laredo, right? Laredo, Texas. It is outside of a couple of the West Coast ports that you've already brought up. It's the largest land port of entry in the U.S. I mean, over 10,000 trucks a day on average coming in to Laredo, plus not even to mention, the rest of Texas and in El Paso and so forth. So that my mind goes to the supply chain, the integrated supply chain, between the U.S. and Mexico, as well as Canada due to USMCA. We've seen some of the whipsaw that was brought up earlier on the West Coast. The same thing is happening in the Southwest in terms of those port volumes. Normally in the last 5 years, if you look at inbound trucks from Mexico, including Laredo, it's been really strong. And so far this year, including the second quarter, it is not. So it's got this whipsaw effect, but then the actual levels are down as well. A large part of that is around tariffs and and certainly the whipsaw effects as well. So that's where my mind goes first and foremost whenever I see those Southwest numbers.
Bob, I thought you were going to go somewhere with a food journey, because we love talking food, and Southwest has some delicious food down there. But my supply chain nerd kicks in, and the Port of Laredo, what a critical juncture to your point. And I've seen some really cool plans for bringing in some autonomous lanes. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But Karin, the Southwest, between what Bobby and Bob has already shared, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see, I think that Bobby said a 6.7% gain in manufacturing in the region. And that is interesting because I do think as tariffs gain traction and get put into effect, we're going to continue to see some increased volatility as really our networks rebalance on where that's coming in, whether it's raw material or finished product, and movement between facilities throughout the United States as well.
Yep, good call out. And hey, I'm always careful what I wish for, but I would just like to see the specificity. Even if it's painful, I just would love to see exactly what we're dealing with, because we'll gain some certainty, and of course we'll be able to make some decisions for sure. Okay, really quick. We talked a lot about manufacturing there, and I want to pull up one little factoid from our friends at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. The Southwest region manufacturing is big business, especially in Texas. I think Texas is second only to California in terms of manufacturing activity. Bobby C may check me if I've got that fact right. So the Fed down there reports a really rosy manufacturing picture for the Lone Star State for July. Gains were reported in overall production, new orders, and really overall business outlooks from leaders in the Texas manufacturing industry. However, it hasn't been the same rosy picture. According to some data, the July 2025 Purchasing Managers Index released by the Institute for Supply Management, well, their data showed continued manufacturing contraction across the U.S. That in July activity was slightly less than June activity. So manufacturing is critical, as we all know, not only a big freight driver, but a massive economic driver. I think one last thing we're looking for there is ISM CEO Thomas Derry mentioned how companies are really figuring out how much of the higher cost from tariffs to pass on to their customers. A lot more conversations around that. So we shall see how it all plays out. All right, so from the Southwest to the Midwest, Bobby Holland, what is your key takeaway here?
Well, so we see in the Midwest that for the first time in 3 years, they had quarterly gains in shipments and spend. We see that it was up 2.6% in shipments and up 2.2% in spend. And this region's yearly declines were its smallest in the last 9 quarters. The yearly decline was 9.2% year over year, and that was the smallest decline. So again, plane's not quite in a dive mode.
Yep. Plane's not quite in a dive mode. I'll take it, Bobby Holland. I will take it. I'm in search of all the good news we can get. All right, so Bob Costello, what about the Midwest? I'm looking forward to your perspective here. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so volatile, up and down, but I think we saw some improvement in manufacturing activity, and of course that's a big one. Think of Michigan, Ohio. You're thinking so. I think that was one of the benefits that we saw, certainly on a quarterly basis, even though the Midwest has seen some sharp declines on a year-over-year basis. And that's also just tougher comps as it was coming down over the last year. So I think it was very positive there. We also saw housing starts in the Midwest improve a bit. So that is something to take away. You know, there is, by the way, if you start peeling back that onion a little bit, single family housing starts haven't been great. It's really on the multifamily starts that we've seen some improvement. So those two things really came out to me looking at some of the numbers in the Midwest.
Can I get a quick, before I go to Karin here? And look, we're always apolitical, right? But the jobs report, that's been the headlines everywhere. How do you see what's going on with the job market factoring in kind of in general here, Bob?
Yeah. So obviously the big headline thing was the revisions to the previous months. They were much, much lower. And to be honest with you, I'm not surprised that has happened. We're expecting the economy to slow down. I think in general, here's the good news. I don't expect a recession. My baseline forecast for the second half of the year is not a recession, but it is below normal growth. And that would be for GDP overall about 2%. So I think that's where we're headed. We're going to see that show up and start in the labor numbers. We're also going to see it in some of the freight numbers. Again, I think we were starting to see this shift from away from experiences to goods, and that could help freight and so forth. But what do you put tariffs on? You put it on goods, you don't put it on services.
That's right.
And so that's, again, getting to what I think Karin said earlier about how much of this gets passed along is key. And we'll see. But those are all things I'm thinking about. And as a result, we're going to talk about the outlook, but it's a little cloudy.
Yes. I think a lot of folks will agree with you. But Karin, the good news there, I want to put a bulletin board, or a roadside big old billboard up, not a bulletin board. Because did you hear from Bob? He's not, good news, he's not projecting a recession.
I know, I wrote it down. I said, not a recession. I got little stars next to it right here. That was my good takeaway for that region.
So what else, Karin, in the Midwest? Your thoughts?
The other thing we have to keep in mind is as you rebalance supply chains and we, move manufacturing around, or we onshore or reshore some of that production capacity, that takes time. There's lead time associated with it. If you're provisioning new facilities or new lines in a production facility, there's lead time associated with it. We can't just, crank up the volume right away. So I think we'll see those numbers continue to increase as those facilities and those investments really hit the market.
Yep. Well said, Karin. And I'll just point out, folks, we've got a data scientist. We've got a real chief economist. Held that in school too. And Karin Bursa, a longtime executive practitioner in supply chain. We're hearing from pros versus some what we get on TV. So we got to listen to trusted resources for information. I want to add one more thing here. We touched on a couple of times consumer spending, but check this out. Overall U.S. consumer spending in Q2 2025 was up 1.4%, but that's well below the 2.8% growth for the same period in 2024. And again, a blend of good news and bad news. That was the fifth slowest rate in a quarter since Q3 2021. Bob, really quick, you know these numbers a lot better than I do. Any other comments around? I love your call out of the shift that we're seeing in spending on goods. That's a great move. Anything else in terms related to consumer spending that you might want to add?
Yeah, so I think you saw it in those numbers, and this is what I was talking about, and that was the goods side was finally doing better than services in terms of growth rate. And the thing to remember about goods is you have non-durable goods. So these are things that we buy in our everyday life that we need to use, and they don't last very long.
Right.
But durable goods are big ticket items, and some of those, they last over 3 years, and some of those durable goods are very interest rate sensitive. So the fact that we're seeing goods spending starting to rise, even though interest rates are on pause for the moment, I think is an example of households have this pent up demand. So we went from tons of good spending during the early parts of the pandemic to very little during the latter years, and everybody was doing experiences, and now we're getting back to normal, right?
Yes.
And I think that can be helpful, even though interest rates haven't started to really fall that much.
Good stuff, Karin. Lots of shifts, but I really welcome the shift that Bob's calling out, where we're spending more money on goods, and that's a great thing for manufacturing, for warehousing, for so many aspects of global supply chain. Your quick thoughts there, Karin.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when the Federal Reserve does take action, I don't know when that's going to be, but invariably sometime in the next 2-3 quarters, we're going to see some movement. There is pent-up demand on large, durable investments. So whether that's in housing or other areas of our lives, I think you'll see the consumer open their wallet. And then I think you'll see businesses responding to that with bigger investments as well.
I like that grounded, constructive optimism you and Bob and Bobby are sharing here. All right, so Bobby, let's go up to the Northeast region. What's your key takeaway that we should really focus in on here?
Well, in the Northeast, they had double-digit increase in housing starts. And because of that, or in part because of that, the Northeast posted its second consecutive quarter with increases in both the quarter over quarter and year over year shipment and spend volumes. When you look at that, it was up 3.3% for shipments.
Okay.
And then up 2.7% year over year. And then in spend, it was up 1.3% for the quarter and up 3.7% year over year. So again, Northeast is on the rise.
Northeast is on the rise. All right, Bob, there's a lot going on up in the Northeast. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, Bobby, it was absolutely right. When we look at housing starts in the Northeast, quarter to quarter up over 11%. And this is after we didn't have a full picture when I wrote the report. So now we do. So up over 11% quarter to quarter in housing starts, year over year up 31%.
Wow.
Right. So very strong. Then also remember, in the Northeast, you've got a large population. So this idea that we've been talking about, goods versus experiences, absolutely came into play. And then the last thing I would say, and this goes more to the spend part by shippers, is, capacity. Listen, I'm a firm believer that capacity has been leaving the industry broadly, right? Number of carriers down, number of drivers down, employee drivers down, amount of equipment down. A lot of people would, and any fleets on here would say, yeah, I haven't been feeling it much. Well, that's because demand hasn't really risen. And up until the second quarter here, we didn't see that happening. And that's why they haven't felt it. But one area where drivers are not thrilled to go is the Northeast, right? And so what happens is you kind of see it there first, because all of a sudden the drivers push back. Hey, I don't want to go into the Northeast. I don't want to go into these very congested areas and then have to sit there in traffic. So the fact that sort of showed up on the spend as well, I think is showing you that underneath all of this, broadly, we have seen reductions in capacity. It just hasn't really shown up that much yet.
Bob, one quick follow-up. Any tariffs and their impact on construction products, lumber, you name it, how does that factor in, do you think, to the overall housing industry and the starts data?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how it shows up. It shows up in pricing, right? So yes, it's going to hurt demand a bit. Again, there's a lot of, in the Northeast, there was a lot of weakness for a while, and that is sort of snapped back a bit. But what happens is, if you look at the overall numbers, you will see that the even though volumes generally, I was talking about housing starts overall, especially single family housing starts in the second quarter. Overall, this is for the entire country, down 9.5% quarter to quarter, down 9% year over year. So multifamily starts, though, were up quite a bit. But where it shows up is pricing of those homes hasn't really come down because even though that weakness, because of some of the tariffs on the inputs to when we're building homes.
Yeah. Bob, I appreciate that. All right, Karin, the Northeast, so many things we could speak to here, but your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that between Bobby and Bob, they really hit on a couple of the core themes there. I think that these double-digit increases are pretty impressive. Bob, I completely missed that it was over 30% year to date, or year over year, on that. That's a big number. That's a big increase. And, yes, it may be multifamily right now. Again, I think if we see downward movement on interest rates, that there is significant pent-up demand that buyers don't feel like they can afford right now, and sellers don't want to get rid of their current mortgage, which may be at a much more favorable rate, in order to buy something that's going to be at a higher rate in today's dollars. So I think if we see even the slightest movement on those interest rates, we're going to see housing activity increase nationally.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're hammering home the interest rate thing. We've all been tracking it, right? It's made for some very interesting TV at times, I'll say. But Bobby can't predict things. The financial institutions don't want to do that, of course, understandably. But Bob, do you want to give a bold prediction of when we might see that interest rate cut that we're all looking for?
So this is the pickle that the Fed is in, right? They have a dual mandate. Those two mandates are, one, maximize employment, all right, and then keep inflation in check. So if you look at those two things right now, they're not going in the same direction in a ways, right? So we saw from the latest job numbers that the job situation, the labor market is absolutely slowing down, Okay, so in that sense, you'd be like, oh, the Fed needs to cut interest rates. But they are also worried about what are these tariffs going to do to inflation. We are in just the infancy, the first or second inning of seeing these costs being passed along to us as consumers. If you go back the last time, when the summer of 2022, we saw inflation rates get to the highest point since the 1980s. But it took like 2 years to get there with the government checks to people and so forth and the spending. So I think the Fed's sitting there going, oh boy, what are we supposed to do? We've got, yes, the labor market is slowing, but we are absolutely concerned about where inflation is going. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't get a rate cut, one rate cut this year. It could absolutely happen. By the spring, it'll start to happen because Jerome Powell's going to be gone and the president's going to get the person he wants in that job. And I have a feeling that person's going to be more aligned with his thinking on lowering interest rates.
Interesting, Bob. Karin, we need to welcome Bob's crystal ball here anytime he wants to join. Am I right, Karin?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't have the depth of analysis that Bob has, but I definitely agree that we're going to see some movement in the next 3 quarters for the factors that he described.
Well, between Bobby, Bob, and Karin, we've got like the Justice League of analysis and industry know-how here. So, Bobby, we're going to bring it home here. Love all the data, truckload of data insights you're dropping on us. Let's talk about the Southeast, home base for me and Karin. Tell us your key takeaway here, Bobby.
Well, in the Southeast, they had quarterly shipment and spend increases for the first time in 4 years. We see that in 0.1%, modest rise in quarter over quarter for shipments, 3.8% rise quarter over quarter in spend for the first time in 4 years, and its combined year over year decreases in both were the worst of the 5 regions. So,
okay, all right. So, Bob, the Southeast, Karin and I both based in Metro Atlanta. I think you call DC home. Is that right, Bob?
That's right.
Tell us your key takeaways in the Southeastern market.
So if we look at just the quarter-to-quarter numbers, the fact that the Southeast went up 3.8% in spending, yet the shipments only barely went up, 0.1, still went up, but not nearly as much. And the fact that fuel prices were down, right? Fuel prices, the national price, meaning that fuel surcharges are down, all right? That tells me, first and foremost, when you add all that up, capacity is tightening up in the Southeast. So yes, we had some large decreases year over year. Again, there's some tough comps going as things have fallen quite a bit in the quarters ahead or previously. But that tells me right now that capacity is tightening up in that region. If we look generally, though, on some of the things that we see over there, there's a lot of manufacturing activity in the Southeast. Yep. We've seen over the years, I talk to people all the time about trade patterns. And yes, we lost factories in the upper Midwest, Michigan, and so forth. And some of those went overseas, but some of them went to the Southeast, right? They went to, Alabama and Georgia and so forth. So some of that activity is important there. Housing starts generally were a little soft there. So we talked about some big gains in the Northeast. In the Southeast, they were a little bit softer, falling 0.6% from quarter to quarter and down over 4.5% year over year in the second quarter. And then finally, don't forget that there's some, yes, they're not nearly as big as on the West Coast, but there are some very important seaports as well that are seeing that whipsaw effect as well in the Southeast.
Yep. That whipsaw, that's going to be a bet. I think there's a dictionary that comes out with the most popular terms of the year. So I bet in December, whipsaw is going to be on the top 5 list. We'll see. Karin, with what's going on around us here in the Southeast, not just in Georgia, but throughout the 8 or 9 state region, your thoughts, Karin?
Yeah, I think the region activity is interesting. I think even in the housing market, we've seen the housing market in the Southeast have a little more depression around it or contraction around it. So I'm sure that that's contributing. But I also think you had mentioned automotive earlier, Scott.
Yep.
I think that's becoming more and more important in the Southeast region as well, with manufacturing facilities and supplier facilities throughout the Southeast. And so as that sector continues to kind of get its sea legs or its new legs in the land of tariff living,
Right.
we're going to see some fluctuation that gets impacted in the Southeast, where maybe you don't traditionally think of the Southeast as an automotive operation, but there's a lot of heavy durable, there's a lot of construction equipment that gets manufactured and assembled, as well as, consumer vehicles.
So true. Folks will be surprised. I mean, I'm looking at the map over here. South Carolina has had some new automotive plants. Alabama's had some big automotive plants. Tennessee and Kentucky. Don't sleep on Tennessee and Kentucky. Ford's got some big sites up there. And then Georgia. Of course, Kia, amongst others, made a legendary investment here forever ago. But that's where I want to go. I want to do a quick update, speaking of automotive. Because, folks, this Rivian plant we've been talking about for a couple of years now, massive project. And it will certainly drive not only considerable jobs, but lots of freight, that clustering effect that Karin mentioned. And they say, it's been on the Rivian plant down in mid-Georgia, I'll call it. It's been on hold. But TechCrunch is reporting that the massive factory site, which is a $5 billion investment, creating thousands of jobs, they're saying it's already started. Now, Rivian leadership said just last week that they plan to restart official construction in early 2026. And this will be one of the biggest automotive investments in the Southeast in quite some time. So we'll see if it comes to fruition. Hey, Bob, whether it's a comment on the automotive industry, which of course is a big critical cog in all of this freight and our economy, or I want to circle back on something you shared earlier. You've got all your fingers and maybe your toes in the pulses of the industry. And one of the things you mentioned is all of your conversations with fleets, owner-operators, you name it, and they're critical sources of insights and what's going on. Your quick comment on the role of the information and the insights we're getting from fleets across the country.
Yeah, so I talk to fleets almost daily, right? And I look at it as my little, if you've heard the Federal Reserve puts out this great data, they look at data as they go in, but they also have this thing called the Beige Book, and it's really based on conversations that they have with business people. This is my Beige Book, right? I talk to these fleets, and here's what I get right now. I mean, we went through a just long, prolonged freight recession. And it was, I look at it normally a freight recession lasts a year or less, and that's just ripping off the Band-Aid. This one has been just a slow pull at it. And so you've had a lot of people out there that are like, this is the worst we've ever seen it. And now what they're telling me is, okay, it's not getting, I think it fits great with the data, U.S. Bank data, it's not getting any worse. In some cases, it's getting a little better, but they're also a little shell-shocked, right? They are nervous about, okay, is this really the end? And I have to tell you, I mean, I'm a little nervous about that too. I mean, I am concerned we couldn't fall back down here with some of the stuff going on with tariffs. I mean, you talk about the Rivian, by the way, in this area in Northern Virginia, DC, we see a ton of Rivians. They are all over the roads here. But when you put these tariffs on, the idea is let's build more factories. And they've obviously done that, and Kia's done that, and there's some big ones that you were mentioning, and it's all true. But those factories take years to build, years. So the idea is the pain from tariffs hits fast. Any benefits, and as an economist, again, I'm not getting political, but as an economist, I will tell you, I think that the overall, that the costs outweigh the benefits, okay? But what benefits do arise can take years to happen. And that's where I think we have to remember. So don't think, hey, we're going to get a lot more freight from all this factory activity that's going to go on. No, if we need to build more factories, that's going to take a very long time before that ever hits.
Bob, excellent commentary. And I would just say, folks, if you aren't familiar with just the site selection component of building new factories, tune into that. They are excellent sources of market information, economic information, sector information. So check that out. You can Google site selection, see all kinds of resources. Okay, we're going to have a fast and furious finish. We got so much. This is a lot to jam pack in an hour. But man, it is must see. I'm walking away here from Bobby, Bob, and Karin with a new certification, a master class in what's going on. Bob and Karin, and Bob, you first. When you peer deeper into your crystal ball, and I really appreciate all of your current analysis and your prognostications you've already shared, but what else do you expect to see in the freight markets in the months ahead?
Yeah, so the other things we haven't really talked about is where do we stand with inventory levels? I touched about it briefly. It was a distribution in the second quarter versus the first quarter, especially in the West. I think that is absolutely true. If you look at inventory levels throughout, manufacturing's quite high. And part of that is they were trying to, as Karin said earlier, they're trying to bring in these goods. They're pulling forward some imports to sort of beat the tariffs and so forth. But at the retail level, they're much leaner, especially if you take out autos. And so I think there's, a give and take. So it depends on where a fleet is, where a shipper is. If they're on the retail side, there's going to have to be some, maybe even a little bit of restocking going on. Wholesale's not too bad, sort of normal. And manufacturing is quite high actually at the moment. But overall, I think, as an industry, as transportation folks, I think we got to realize, okay, a boom is not coming our way. Okay. I would not anticipate that seeing. The question is, do we skirt? I think we skirt an overall a recession. Do we skirt a sort of a going back down in recession in transportation? And that is sort of the hard part to predict. That is, where do we end up with tariffs? Tomorrow, the new tariff rates go in effect. When in January, when we started the year, we had an effective tariff rate in the U.S. of 2.4%. Right now, we're at 18.4%, wow. And that can go up from there. So I think, there are some good underlying things that we were getting excited about that didn't quite hit in the first quarter that I think showed up a little bit in the second quarter and with what Bobby was talking about in a rebound. But is it sustainable with some of the broader trends that are going on with labor markets and, our population and so forth, and the ability to have labor to produce some of this stuff, as well as the ability to buy it when prices are likely to go up because of rising inflation in large part from tariffs?
Oh, goodness gracious. You need a whole podcast series dedicated to just your last response. I'm serious, Bob. I tell you, Karin, I want you to follow up to that. What do you see?
I want to pick out all the positive things he said and
please do.
Ignore all the negative if possible. No, but Bob mentioned recession again, or that we may abate a recession in the marketplace. I think that is positive. I think that the tariffs will take time to ripple through the economy as a whole. And it's different. It's different than how we've operated for the past number of decades. And so we are going to react emotionally in some areas. We've done the forward buying. We may do more of that over time, but it'll take some time to land on new patterns in the marketplace. But Bob also mentioned something that I think is really important, and that is that these regional performance indicators are critical as well. So contraction, he mentioned, in the Southeast, or less capacity in the Southeast, where we've got some available capacity in other regions across the U.S. I think that we need to keep an eye on that as well, because those become factors in how we move, whether it's raw materials to our manufacturing facilities or finished goods into distribution centers and into retail. That will come into play as well.
Karin, excellent commentary. And get ready. I'm going to circle back one more time for your patent key takeaway in this fast and furious final 3 or 4 minutes. So let's do this. Let's help folks put all this perspective to action here today in a very helpful manner. And Bobby, I want to start with making sure folks know how to find the Freight Payment Index, subscribe to this great, powerful, free resource. Where would you direct people to, Bobby?
As you can see, it's freight.usbank.com. You provide a small amount of information, and then it comes to your email inbox quarterly.
It's just everything in life should be that easy. Okay, Bob, really have enjoyed. We've had a lot of guest stars in that fourth chair, so to speak, and you have become one of my favorites already. You delivered on time and full. So, Bob, how can folks connect with you and the really cool things you are doing over at the American Trucking Associations?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. This has been great. So you can go to our website. It's trucking.org. Pretty simple. You'll find a lot of stuff going on. One thing I would like to highlight is in October, we're having our big annual meeting in lovely San Diego. Always love going out there. And not only will I be giving a broad economic update at that industry meeting, which is very, there'll be a few thousand people at least there. But I'm also partnering up with U.S. Bank to talk about data and all of this as well. So we'll have a separate session for that. So exciting stuff happening in San Diego.
Bob, I love it. We got National Truck Driver Appreciation Week coming up in September. And folks, we got to love on the truck drivers. They make the majority, they're a critical backbone of what goes on in global supply chain. Bob, appreciate what you and the ATA do in that regard. Okay, Karin. You have a very unfair question because Bobby and Bob and you have really delivered. But if you had to pick one thing that folks have to dial in from this last power hour, what was that, Karin?
Yeah, I would say the one thing is that it's early, but we are hitting a possible turning point in the freight market. Bobby opened by stating that both shipments and spend volumes were increasing for the first time since 2022. So that's a sign that goods are starting to move again across the country. And while our year-over-year numbers are still down, these declines are narrowing. So all 5 regions had some positive indicators in them. That's good news. And hopefully we'll see some early signs of stabilization as we know more about tariffs and then interest rates. So stay tuned. Come back every quarter or subscribe and get that report. It's going to help you make smarter, faster decisions about your business, whether you're in supply chain or finance or business strategy. Some of these changes take time to implement in your organizations.
Well put. Folks, we'll drop the link there. Check out the report. Check out the cool things Bob and ATA team are doing over at trucking.org. Make sure you sign up for the Freight Payment Index as Bobby has shared. Hits your inbox like clockwork every quarter. And you combine that with all the other metrics and data and trusted resources of true information out there. That's going to help you make better decisions much faster and much more confidently. And as you heard it here from Bob, we're not expecting a full-blown recession. I'll take that good news for now. So big thanks, Bobby Holland, Director of Freight Business Analytics with U.S. Bank. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.
Bob Costello, Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of International Trade and Security Policy for the American Trucking Associations. Bob, come back anytime.
I would love it.
Karin Bursa, always a pleasure. Really enjoyed your perspective here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Learned a lot.
I did too. I got about 27 pages of notes today. Folks, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Be sure to connect with Bob, Bobby, and Karin. More importantly, take one thing you heard from them here today. Share it with your team, your colleagues, your families. Well, they'll be better off you did. And hey, as Karin says, we got to take facts and feelings, that approach to not only life, but to certainly the leading supply chains. And hopefully we can take these inputs from the show today and convert them into deeds, not words. So with all that said, on behalf of the Supply Chain Now team, Scott Luton here, challenging you, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. We'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Join the Supply Chain Now community for more supply chain perspectives, news, and innovation. Check out supplychainnow.com, subscribe to Supply Chain Now on YouTube, and follow and listen to Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcasts.